Causes for the loss of biodiversity. The major factors which cause and contribute to the loss of biodiversity are minimum viable population, maximum viable area, alteration, loss, degradation, and fragmentation of habitats. Inbreeding, isolation, introduction of invasive, exotic, that is non native or foreign species, overexploitation of biotic resources, and extensive urbanization and massive industrialization, along with environmental pollution, extension of intensive agriculture, large scale deforestation, and heavy destruction of coral reefs and wetlands. Then the indiscriminate poaching and massacre of wildlife, natural calamities and catastrophes such as flood, drought, wildfire, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, landslides, epidemics, and so on. So, first we are going to discuss about the minimum viable population. Minimum viable population. Minimum viable population MVP is the lowest number of individuals or the smallest population size essential for a species to survive in the wild over a specific period of time. To be more specific, it is the smallest possible population size at which a biological population has a high probability for survival in the wild without facing extinction either due to natural disasters or due to demographic, environmental, or genetic stochasticities, probability, or chance. MVP is applicable exclusively to wild populations. A population size below the MVP will have only reduced reproductive potential, low genetic variability, low adaptability, and low survival value. Low reproductive potential in turn will adversely affect population growth and will eventually push the species to an endangered status. Thus, it becomes clear that MVP is essential for the long term survival and maintenance of genetic variability of a species. Many endangered species are below the MVP of 250 to 500 individuals, which is accepted as the standard value for avoiding inbreeding. Small populations succumb to rapid decline in number and also to local endangered status or extinction for four major reasons as follows. First one, inbreeding depression, genetic load, loss of genetic heterozygosity, and loss of genetic variability. Then the demographic fluctuations due to random variations in natality and mortality. Environmental fluctuations due to variation in competition, predation, disease, and food supply. Periodic natural catastrophes such as droughts, floods, fires, volcanic eruptions, storms, cyclones, and etc. So, these four reasons are the main reasons for small populations succumb to rapid decline in number. These are also criteria for endangered status also, like the inbreeding depression, genetic load, loss of genetic heterozygosity, and loss of genetic variability. Demographic fluctuations due to random variations in natality and mortality, along with environmental fluctuations due to variation in competition, predation, disease, and food supply. Periodic natural catastrophes such as droughts, floods, fires, volcanic eruptions, storms, cyclones, etc. The next point is the maximum viable area. Maximum viable area MVA means the optimum habitable area of a geographical range essential for a species to survive in the wild without the threat of rarity, extinction, or endangered status. Considerable reduction in this area in all probability may cause per capita resource insufficiency, intense resource competition, increased predation pressure, higher chances for inbreeding depression, and low genetic variability, adaptability, fitness, and survival value of organisms. This in turn may contribute to the gradual extinction or endangered status of species. Now, the next point is the modification, fragmentation, and loss of habitats. Alteration, fragmentation, reduction, degradation, and destruction or loss of natural habitat for human settlement, urbanization, industrialization, agriculture, commercial plantations, grazing, construction of dams, mining, quarrying, etc., have contributed much to accelerate the modern wave of species extinction and the loss of biodiversity. They often involve large scale devastation and desertification of natural forests and grasslands, reclamation of wetlands, eutrophication of ponds and lakes, destruction of coral reef ecosystems, etc. These activities kill organisms in large numbers, force away animals from their settled homes, disrupt the interrelation between species, and push many species to an endangered status. A habitat needs not be completely destroyed for a species to become endangered or extinct. Its reduction, compartmentalization, or qualitative degradation can cause species extinction. Habitat reduction considerably cuts down the maximum viable area and thereby cause the endangered status or extinction of species. So we were discussing something like a habitat needs not be completely destroyed for a species to become endangered or extinct. Its reduction, compartmentalization, or qualitative degradation can cause species extinction. Habitat reduction considerably cuts down the maximum viable area and thereby causes the endangered status or extinction of species. Habitat modification and degradation cause abnormal changes in microclimate and alter ecological interactions. This in turn causes the decline of species. Habitat modification and degradation cause abnormal changes in microclimate and alter ecological interactions. This in turn causes the decline of species, making them endangered or pushing them to extinction. Habitat modification involves the conversion of a habitat for other purposes. An example is the conversion of wetlands into agricultural fields. Habitat degradation mostly involve unfavorable qualitative changes by environmental pollution, climatic alterations, etc. Fragmentation of habitat is the compartmentalization of an extensive and continuous habitat into distinct, discontinuous, and isolated patches for different purposes. Partitioning of a vast grassland for commercial plantations, croplands, or orchards, townships, etc., is an example of habitat fragmentation. Fragmentation of a habitat often divides a large metapopulation into several small subpopulations which cannot sustain themselves. This causes the local extension and extinction, the local extinction of several species and pushes several others to an endangered status. Fragmentation often creates barriers that restrict or prevent species from dispersal and colonization of new areas. It may also adversely affect the seasonal migration of some migratory species. Habitat fragmentation reduce considerably the overall area of the habitat and also increase the distance between the remaining patches. Habitat fragmentation reduces considerably the overall area of the habitat and also increases the distance between the remaining patches. Qualitative environmental degradation very seriously hits the more susceptible species with the result that they eventually become endangered or extinct. Also, habitat fragmentation reduces the dispersal potential of populations. This in turn increases the chances for inbreeding, adversely affecting the genetic diversity. Wait a minute. So, qualitative environmental degradation very seriously hits the more susceptible species with the result that they eventually become endangered or extinct. Also, habitat fragmentation reduces the dispersal potential of populations. This in turn increases the chances for inbreeding, adversely affecting the genetic diversity, fitness, and growth of populations. In the long run, the affected species become endangered not only because of the overall loss of habitat area but also because of increased insularization. 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 This is a new term. Insularization is the process by which the isolated habitat patches get completely cut off from each other as small zones just as islands are cut off from the mainlands. As the distance between the isolated patches increases, colonization becomes more difficult, especially for less mobile species, that is insularization. Each isolated patch may initially contain a residual number of species far in excess of the carrying capacity. So, in due course, the number of species will fall since extinction always overrides colonization. This is known as relaxation. A phenomenon where extinction always overrides colonization. This is known as relaxation. Relaxation and insularization are the new terms we have seen, like the insularization and relaxation. Studies have revealed that quite a number of natural habitats in the different parts of the world have been striking by more than 20% since 1980, well above 100 million hectares of forest habitats all over the world have disappeared since 2000 and 2050. Nearly 20% of the seagrass habitats have been lost since 1970. More than 20% of the mangrove habitats have disappeared since 1980. In some parts of the world, about 95% of the wetlands have been filled. More than 60% of world's larger river systems have been fragmented by dams. Next major point is the introduction of invasive exotic species to new areas. Exotic species, alien or foreign species, are the the invasive exotic species, the non-native species introduced to an area. In the new habitat, they have little or no threat from their natural enemies, such as predators, competitors, and parasites, which normally keep their multiplication under check. So, in the new area, their population grows explosively. This growth will eventually turn to be an ecological cancer or a biological pollution. It may modify the environment and cause the local displacement and disappearance or local extinction of the native species through altered biological interactions. It may modify the environment and cause the local displacement and disappearance, local extinction of the native species through altered biotic interactions. The invasive species may often increase the chances for competition, predation, and spreading of disease. This adversely affects the native species and paves the way for their extinction or endangerment. Introduction of the exotic species is perhaps the second major cause of species extinction, next to habitat destruction. Some examples are given below. Water hyacinth, like the Icornia, is an exotic plant introduced to many tropical countries. It often clogs rivers, lakes, ponds, affecting the survival of many aquatic species. Lantana camara is an exotic plant which has invaded the forest lands in India, suppressing many native species. Nile perch is an exotic predatory fish introduced to Lake Victoria in South Africa. It has caused the local elimination of several native species of fishes. The illegally introduced South African catfish and pacu have been recorded from Ganga and Periyar in 2011. So these are some of the exotic alien invasive species which contribute to the destruction of the local habitat and leads to the extinction of some native species, which are the water hyacinth, Lantana camara, Nile perch, pacu fish, and the South American catfish. Now we are going to learn about an effect called domino effect, which contributes to loss of biodiversity. Domino effect is a rare ecological eventuality in which a species goes to extinction as a consequence of the extinction of another species in the same area. Domino effect. In other words, it is an ecological eventuality in which the extinction of one species leads to the subsequent extinction of other. The case of dodo and the so-called dodo trees is often arbitrarily cited as an example of domino effect. Scientific name of dodo was Rhaphis cuculatus. So this dodo tree's scientific name is Calvaria major. Dodo was an awkward-looking, fearless and flightless bird of Mauritius, about the size of turkey with hooked beak and stubby wings. It became extinct in Mauritius by about 1680 due to the colonization of the island by sailors and the exotic animals introduced by them. The newly introduced pigs extensively destroyed the nests and eggs of the birds, and sailors hunted the birds in large numbers to its extermination. Centuries later, dodo trees became rare in the island. Scientists found the reason in the absence of dodo. They hypothesized that the seeds of these trees germinate only if they are processed in the digestive tract of dodo, which feeds on the fruits. Without dodo to swallow the fruits and excrete the seeds would not germinate. Today, turkeys and gemstone polishes are substituted to do the job of processing the seeds. By this way, the plants are still there. So that is a case of a domino effect, which is exemplified by the example of dodo and the Calvaria major tree. Calvaria major. Now the next point is the overexploitation of biotic resources. Unchecked exploitation of biotic resources is yet another cause of species extinction. Unchecked exploitation of biotic resources is yet another cause of species extinction. Overexploitation of species eventually reduces their population size to a critical level. As a result, they become endangered and vulnerable to extinction. Next main point is the inbreeding. Inbreeding is the interbreeding between closely related individuals which share many common genes. It results in three deleterious effects in individuals, namely increased genetic homozygosity, loss of genetic variation, and inbreeding depression. So, what is genetic homozygosity? Genetic homozygosity involves loss of potential for adaptation to changing environments, increased susceptibility to diseases, and the greater probability for extinction. So, continued inbreeding and the consequent increase in homozygosity eventually results in the extinction or endangered status of a species. Homozygous populations are relatively more susceptible to decimation through diseases. A classical example is the Irish potato famine in the 1840. There was a devastation of a staple crop due to potato blight caused by the infection of Phytophthora infestans. Next major point is the loss of genetic variability. Genetic variability results from different allelic combinations among individuals. It is very important in providing populations adaptability in changing environments. In small populations, allelic frequencies may change from one generation to the next. This is called genetic drift. When an allele is at a low frequency in a small population, there is high probability for its loss in each generation. When an allele is at a low frequency in a small population, what is happening? An allele in a small frequency or a lower frequency in a small population, there is a high probability for its loss in each generation. Thus, it becomes clear that loss of genetic variability and genetic drift usually considerably reduces the adaptability and fitness of populations, which in turn may make them endangered in the long run. So, what is genetic drift? In small populations, allelic frequencies may change from one generation to the next. This is called genetic drift. Change of allelic frequencies from one generation to the next. When an allele is at low frequency in a small population, there is a high probability for its loss in each generation. Thus, it becomes clear that loss of genetic variability and genetic drift considerably reduces the adaptability and fitness of populations, which in turn may make them endangered in the long run. That is the genetic variability loss. The third point, which leads to the inbreeding, is the inbreeding depression. Inbreeding depression is a progressive decrease in the vigor, vitality, reproductive potential, adaptability, fitness, and survival value in the successive generations of a population due to inbreeding. It results from increased homozygosity for deleterious recessive alleles and also from the breakup of balanced polygenic systems. Inbreeding occurs when plants self-pollinate and self-fertilize and animals mate with close relatives over many generations. To put in a nutshell, the role of inbreeding can be summarized as follows. Inbreeding lowers the reproducible potential, fitness, and survival value, promotes homozygosity, and reduces genetic variability in offspring. Increased homozygosity increase the susceptibility to diseases and enhance the genetic load, that is, the number of deleterious recessive genes. Whereas decreased genetic variation decreases fitness and survival value. The three sets of factors, namely low reproductive potential, low adaptability, and low survival value, along with high susceptibility to infectious diseases and greater probability for heritability, greater probability for hereditary disorders come into combined play and very seriously affect population growth. Low population growth, in all probability, makes the species endangered in the long run. Next major cause is the isolation of populations. Isolation of small populations also is a major factor that contributes to the endangered status of populations. In small isolated populations, there is maximum probability for inbreeding, which in turn causes inbreeding depression, loss of genetic variability, and increased homozygosity. This, by all means, increase the genetic load and decrease the reproductive potential, adaptability, and survival value of the offsprings. As a result, isolated populations become endangered in the long run. The next one is the man-wild animals conflict. Struggle for existence is the law of nature, and it always involves intraspecific and interspecific conflicts for various natural resources. Man-wild animal conflicts are quite common nowadays. Report reveal that the number of human lives and the extent of human properties lost to the attack and vandalism of wild animals are inconceivably higher. Similarly, the number of wild animals killed and locally eliminated at the hands of man is much greater than ever before. The tribals, the tribals living in deep interior forests and the villagers inhabiting near around the periphery of forest, sanctuaries and game parks are the major targets of wild animals. Elephants, tigers, leopards, wolves, hyenas, monkeys, etc. are the common wild animals which encroach, encroach human settlements and come into discord and conflict with local residents. Elephants damage houses, buildings, and other constructions, destroy crops, plantations, orchards, and nurseries, and sometimes turn against man. Tigers, leopards, wolves, and hyenas kill or rob away domestic animals. Rarely, tigers become man eaters. Monkeys enter farmyards in large troops and destroy crops. Sometimes they may become aggressive vandals and enter houses, destroy valuable properties, and attack the residents. In all the above instances, the infuriated man retaliates, and wreaks vengeance by shooting down the intruders and attackers or killing them by trapping, poisoning, exploding crackers and bombs, etc. Some of the common causes for the insurgence of wild animals into human settlements are the following: loss of destruction, loss or destruction of natural habitats by human activities or natural disasters, shortage of food during lean seasons, drought and scarcity of water during summer, blockage or destruction of the forest tracks or corridors used by forest animals for their movement from one range to another. This will confuse and mislead the animals, and they may erroneously or inadvertently divert their routes and accidentally enter villages or areas of human settlement. Overpopulation or overcrowding of wild animals in forests. These are the reasons for wild animal conflicts. with humans. Loss or destruction of natural habitats, shortage of food during lean seasons, drought and scarcity of water, blockage or destruction of the forest tracks, and this will confuse them. Overpopulation and overcrowding of wild animals in forests. These are the some major points which are related to biodiversity loss.